Welcome to Everyday Leadership, a podcast where we unpack how our amazing guests lead themselves both personally and professionally in their everyday lives. Good morning and welcome to Everyday Leadership. This morning I have the pleasure of sitting down with Mr. Dino Myers-Lamptey. How are you doing, sir?
I'm very good, thank you.
So you've been out there enjoying the snow with the kids this morning as well?
That's right. You've got to take every opportunity. Fresh snow, fresh powder. It feels like it's been a while, but we have hills in Tunbridge Wells, so you've got to turn them into the peaks of the Alps nowadays, haven't you? Because that seems like a distant memory.
Oh man, I was saying this to someone yesterday. I can't wait to travel again. You know, I really do miss just having a different experience in different countries.
Don't tell yourself that. You're only, you need to have low expectations in this period. The longer you can keep your expectations lower, the happier you will be.
Oh no, the hope stays alive. The hope is not gonna go away. I'm saying 2021 is gonna happen. I don't know, it might be December 2021, but it's gonna happen this year sometime.
You'll end up on a cruise.
Oof. Nah, I'm too young for that. You are the founder of the Barber Shop. And in fact, before we even delve into all of that, I'm actually curious, how did you end up in the creative industry? Because I did my research into you, I found out you had like an economics and philosophy degree. So
Yep.
I was like two polar opposite. So I'm kind of curious, like, how did you end up in what you're doing, what you've done for the last 17 years?
Yeah, great question. So, like all good, African families, my dad was a doctor and wanted me to be a doctor, wanted all the kids to be doctors. My mum was, a nurse and later on a health visitor. So they all worked in the medical profession. And that was almost like the guidance and the chosen route. And like, all good, rebellious children, that became the last thing that I ever wanted to do. So if there's one thing I knew that I wasn't going to do, that was to do medicine. And going through kind of school, I guess, I naturally, was drawn to the arts. But art, was almost a guarantee of having an unsteady future, let's say. I didn't quite have the trust funds in place to pursue that line of work. But, as you do when you're in school and you go through that work experience moment and they run that awful computer trying to find, potential professions for you. And it comes up with the most kind of uninspiring things possible. So after rejecting a few of those things, I basically said that I'd like to work in advertising. And I was put into a company. I found a company in London. So I grew up in Essex, and so I ended up commuting for my work experience, and went to somewhere near the Barbican. And it wasn't really an advertising agency. It was more of a printing kind of place. It was more like a design and print operation. I've got this kind of memory of almost being put off from advertising at the age of 14, going, that's all a bit boring, really. I spent all my time kind of like lining up screen prints. And then the one day that they allowed me onto the Macintoshes, I just remember them being really frustrating because they had one button, and every time I pressed something, there was this quacking sound that, they had this duck quack that was like just going off, going, you've done something wrong, you've done something wrong. I mean, that was like the Mac equivalent of the paperclip then, the annoying thing that should have never been there, just reminding you and the rest of the office how much of an idiot you were being. So anyway, I had a very average work experience. So I guess after that, I was like, okay, it's got to be something more financial, maths based and whatever else. So, I did maths and but also art, because I still loved art at A level. And then when it came to choosing a university subject, it was like, well, what's it going to be? And I think economics was the thing that I probably enjoyed most because it had this kind of mix of the social kind of science as well, how people worked. And then philosophy, I just found quite fascinating because I knew nothing about it. But yeah, I knew it was an interesting subject they never taught at school. And when you look at it and you start applying at universities, I did the whole thing of thinking, oh, PPE, I heard about PPE, that sounds quite interesting, politics, philosophy and economics. And actually, I couldn't really care less about the politics part. So that's how I ended up with economics and philosophy. And then, then after that, the advertising part. So going through university, most of the people that do economics end up in probably the financial related fields or consultancy in some way. But at university, I was very active in doing a lot of extracurricular things. So that was everything from running big kind of club nights, like student club nights, to I was head of advertising of the student radio station. I also took an extra year and was a sports sabbatical officer, which was like an elected position in Sheffield University. So you had to kind of like, weirdly do the political thing of doing the hustings and campaigning for yourself, which was quite a hilarious experience. But I got voted in, elected, and there was a paid position. And I think throughout that whole experience, in terms of the number of things that we did, we did things like, really kind of like quite crazy ideas at the time. Like in order to promote our club night, we created a magazine, for example, that we distributed for free to tell people that, of course, the best night in town was our club night, as well as doing various other things that are much, if I tell the stories, they're quite close to social network, kind of like, like hacking computer networks to email the whole of the university to tell them about a club night, highly controversial stuff at the time. I managed to get away with not getting kicked out of university for. But ultimately, I think that, I got a first for kind of like, advertising, marketing, and the whole piece then. And so really straight away after university, the most sensible thing seemed to get a sensible job in a marketing department within a big company. And of course, you had at the time, I think it was Mars were the biggest payer of graduate marketing positions. So I went for the Mars scheme. I got down to something like the last 25. I went to the factory in Slough and I didn't get the job. So then I was like, right, what next? So after that, I looked into, different things like, just, other advertising related fields. And then I applied to all the big name advertising agencies. I was like, right, let's just go advertising agency side. So I sent in CVs to all the Saatchis and Saatchis of this world and, the AMVs and the 𝐥𝐤𝐬s. Everything with someone's name above the door. I sent my CV in. Now, I must have sent something like 20 letters or something. And I really wish I had kept them because every single one of them was a rejection. I didn't even get an interview. And I thought that, I was someone who had quite a lot of, varied experience, let's say, at university. I hustled in a lot of different areas. I thought this is the perfect kind of like, qualification for it. And little did I know that, no, you have to do, far more or know far more people to get to break into this, slightly cottage industry. So, quite an interesting story about my application is that, I was applying in the days when, believe it or not, some companies actually, ask you to put your photo in the application form as well. So I remember having a conversation with one person at one company where I actually called them for some feedback because I actually wanted to know why at that stage I hadn't got through. And I was one of those that put asked for the photo and I had this kind of really awkward conversation with the person on the other end. I mean, they probably didn't even really read my CV, but they were like, oh, we just get, we get loads of people from, Oxford and Cambridge applying and all the rest of it. And I was like, okay, it's like that, is it? Okay, all right. So, I thought in advertising was this creative business. And, but yeah, it seems that, I didn't go to the right university or, I wasn't the right fit, let's say. Anyway, I was still a little bit kind of like persistent in this ambition, maybe a bit kind of dumb and naive, but sometimes that's probably what you need. So I kept on looking and I looked on the IPA website, which is like the industry website. And I noticed the jobs, kind of page, and there were some jobs that were advertised that were for companies that I didn't know even existed. They all sound like pharmaceutical companies, and they had job descriptions that I found quite interesting. They had things in them that made them sound creative. So one was like they all turned out to be media companies, and they were very good at writing what were probably quite some dull jobs in really exciting ways. So one was like a TV buyer, one was like a press buyer, and the other one was like a media planner. But they made them sound so exciting. You're going to work with these brands and all this kind of stuff. So I just kind of like, applied to 3 of them at the time. And a really weird thing happened. I got 3 interviews. I got 3 interviews back straight away, 100% record. So I had this kind of like complete stark contrasting experience of applying to all the places that I wanted to work at, that, everyone knew about, that I knew of as being in the advertising industry. And then suddenly on the IPA website, I found these companies that no one had ever mentioned to me, I never come across. And they had exciting job descriptions, and I got interviews at all 3. And they were very different jobs as well. And I ended up, going to all three, and I got 3 job offers. So I passed, 100% in that world, and I chose the company that, that whereas the job role itself wasn't the thing that excited me the most, but the people at that company were the people that I felt the most confident with, and they came across with the most kind of energy, sense of direction. And I always tell the story that when I look back at it, the really interesting thing is my first boss in media was a guy called 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐬, which no clues as to where he's from, and it was his kind of like involvement as well, when I think about it now, that made me just feel a little bit more comfortable in going and working for that company, which was a much more kind of diverse company, I guess, from the start. And that company was Mediacom. So I started my career there, and that's how I got into the advertising industry. And well, the rest is 20 more years of stories.
Wow, that's a very tenacious way of approaching that. I wanna make this happen, and you didn't give up. You just kept on, even though you kept on getting more and more obstacles in your way, you kept on trying to find ways of overcoming that, which is really, really impressive, to be honest. Because a lot of times when you hit that first roadblock, you're like, these companies don't want me. They don't want my face. I'm not the right fit for them, and you kind of back away. But you're like, okay, let me look at a different way of attacking this problem. And 3 and 3. When you put forward those three applications, did that also have your face on there as well, or did you take that off?
No, the media companies never asked for a photo on the application form. I think you could say that the media companies were desperate. Whereas the advertising agencies have people queuing up and outside the door, willing to do very low paid jobs for very long periods of time, just to say they work at somewhere quite high profile and sexy. Media companies were like, everyone was like, who would want to work in a place like that? But actually, they were really exciting places. And even with hindsight, I think I fell into the right place, and I wouldn't have changed it for anything, because if you look at the last 20 years in the industry across media and creative and advertising, the story has been the growth of media agencies and the rise of media agencies. And actually, particularly in the last 5 years, there's been a serious decline in advertising and creative agencies in terms of their returns. So all the momentum, all the force has been in the media agency world. And I've kind of like witnessed and seen through such a transient period of time. When I started my career as a press buyer at Mediacom, FHM was the number one, thing, doing over 1 million copies. The press and the magazine world was the height of the industry. There were incredible events. There were, I always tell, having experiences of, the Top of the Pops 100th issue party, and Girls Aloud and Busted and the Cheeky Girls are there, and this is a media party, and everyone's just having fun. It was those kind of days where, it was exciting, and there was lots of it. And then you go through different phases. You see the emergence of digital, the growth. Facebook, 2005, I think. It came about. You're witnessing this kind of stuff come about, and not be, anything big, anything. You're witnessing all the debates about, is it here to stay? Will it make money? Will it not? And then YouTube come along, 2007, I think it is. Twitter, and you're seeing all these things emerge, and then you're seeing them suddenly dominate, and the whole kind of landscape change, the whole shift in power. You're seeing the decline of the press institutions, but you're seeing them diversify as well into digital places, and you're just seeing it kind of played out. We're seeing how TV's evolving quite a lot, getting much more into that digital space. So I think it's just that it's an incredibly exciting kind of place to be. And actually, I think the power and the strength in anyone in the marketing industry is keeping at pace with the change, because it's very easy. In most kind of jobs and professions, I think with time you get more relationships. You become a little bit kind of wiser, and that's kind of like the power in the job, that you have this kind of like a position of your contacts are the key thing. But actually, really, one of the key advantages in the industry that we're in is really understanding the new thing, and being on top of it, and being comfortable in being able to talk about it and know the benefits of using that medium, that platform, over using something else.
So one thing you just alluded to is the impact that innovation has really, really played in the industry, which has driven growth for some companies and decline for others. And one thing that we also know is when it comes to innovation, you need a lot of diversity in your organization. However, that's something that, based on what I've read and researched, and obviously you have a better take on this because you've been in the industry for the last 20 plus years, there's a lack of diversity and inclusion to a higher level within the industry. So I'm just curious to see, one, what have you seen change over the last 20 years that you've been in that space? And two, why do you think a lot of agencies are struggling to get the right people into their organizations?
So, on one hand, I could say that probably not enough has changed. And you could definitely look at it and say not a lot has really changed. Statistically, we know that what's changed is representation and diversity has changed at an entry level across the industry. So the numbers have got greater, and it rests at something around about 16.4% at the moment in terms of ethnic minorities in agency world, and that's across kind of media and creative. However, when you kind of like look at that statistic, when you proportion the split that are agencies that are based in London in terms of the workforce that's based in London, which is closer to 40% in terms of the true representation figure, that shows how short the industry is still falling even at an entry level. The true crisis is when you look at it in terms of how those people are retained throughout the company and how they progress and rise to the top. And that's when the falls are much, much greater. And actually in the IPA census on diversity, which was released last year, it was shocking really, because, the IPA, 4 or 5 years earlier set a 2020 target, which they went backwards on. They went backwards on in terms of the most kind of senior level, the C-suite. It went from 5.1% to 4.7%, I think it was, in terms of
4.7, C-suite.
Representation. Yeah, which is just plain and simply not good enough. Not good enough in the slightest. And so, I talk about the advertising industry being a little bit like the music industry was pre-1959. And why is 1959 important? Well, that was the creation of Motown. So we all know what music was like before 1959, and we all know what music is like now. And, you had elements of diversity. Louis Armstrong was doing his thing in the 1930s and 40s and whatever else. And, interesting, cool, a bit different. We all kind of like the odd kind of swing tune from back in the day. But actually, it's nowhere in comparison to where music is now or what Motown did and what it suddenly brought into the market. And advertising is in a very similar place. It's a relatively young industry, really, when you think about it. All the Mad Men kind of era stuff is, they're talking 1960s when that was all kind of held, and that's really when the whole thing kind of boomed. And since then, not a lot has changed in terms of we've seen rapid change in terms of mediums and digitalization of the industry in that sense. But in terms of practice and how we do things and how we persuade and how we are creative, not a dramatic amount has changed, and a large part of that, I believe, is because of the same kind of personnel that has been in the business. The fact that when I was applying to get into creative agencies, I was really only allowed to go for one type of job, which was the account manager job. And the account manager job, the truth of the matter is that I was too creative for those account manager jobs. Because actually the process and the structure in creative agencies needs dismantling largely, because they're not really designed for democratization of creativity. It's very hierarchical. You have a creative department within a creative company. You have account people who are there to manage the client and work and liaise with the client. You have strategy people who are there to, come up with briefs and then give them to creatives to then come up with, the design and the work. You have project managers. You have lots and lots of silos, and you have a system of passing work around the different silos. Creativity doesn't work like that. Creativity can come from anywhere. It's about kind of inspiration, unusual combinations, things coming together, smashing, passionate people with points of views and different perspectives, thinking about things, lone wolves going off on long walks and coming back with, great things, but also working with teams. That's, creativity and innovation is messy. It's different. It's really kind of it's just like the process of making music, for example. If you were going to predict the next hit, you couldn't predict the team that's working on that next hit. There'll be probably a different writer, a different bass player, a different producer. Even with the same artist, even with Drake, where there's probably a formula in a sense of what he's doing, but it's like, there'll be a bunch of different people involved in that next track, because that's what you're doing. Because the true persuasion which is what we're trying to do, which is similar to music in a sense that you're trying to connect, you're trying to get people to love something, and listen to it time and time again, and to go back and for it to be memorable, to encode that in memory. It's not just about doing things that are proven to work. It's about doing things that stand out and are different, that make people stop in their tracks and go, oh, wow, this is great. This is why, music will never always be just programmed by an algorithm, machine learning, for example. You can do that now. There's some great, software out there that can, turn out a tune, constantly. Can turn out a hit in terms of, it knows what a hit looks like. However, it will never be a hit. It will never be a hit because, every machine knows how to do that. And that becomes the norm. That becomes the average. Very quickly, that good becomes average. And actually, how do you get to good, or how do you get to great? Well, actually, it's the human element of it. That kind of different mind that goes, hang on a minute, I know that everyone's doing it. I know that works. But no, I'm going to try something different. I want to do something different. Because I know that actually what I'm trying to do is to get people to notice this. And to notice this means it's standing out from the rest of the pack and being different. And standing out from the rest of the pack and being different, if that is one of the key kind of components and ingredients behind creativity and being recognized, then it's also one of the key components of success and results. And that's why it's essential for that. It's in businesses. So when we look at the industry and how it's evolved over the last 20 years, what I've seen is, there's definitely, to be fair as well, we do have to try and segment the industry a little bit, because media has done much, much better than creative and advertising in the industry. I think, the advertising agency world is still very set in its old school mentality of, let's say stereotyping people for certain roles. So if you walk around the average advertising company, you could tell what department you're in just literally by looking at the people that were in it. Even now. And actually, the funny thing is about them is probably the most diverse departments probably will be the creative departments. But, those are people who have probably been through an art school or something like that, in some way or form. And, in some of them, if they're lucky enough, if their companies are lucky enough or smart enough, they're working with someone like the SCA, which is the School of Communication Arts, which is the world's best kind of like creative school, which is very, very fair in the way in which it puts its graduates through. So it has a program where, some people are paying the full fee, some people are paying a partial fee, and some people are paying no fees. So it really kind of like democratizes that opportunity in a sense and gives that, equality of opportunity. And actually if you do walk into that school, for example, you will see 40, 50 people that look like society, that look like the world that we live in. And they are a bit of a factory for creating talent that ends up living in some of the better kind of creative agencies out there. So, that's where you'll get your dose of difference in those departments. But, unless you've been lucky to be on some kind of program like that, then, ultimately, your route is, you've got to hope that your parents gave you the permission to, not earn money for a decent amount of time and pursue the career of your dreams rather than the career of reality. And, maybe in 10 years' time, you might make a good ad that makes you famous and then you get paid for it.
That is crazy. That's the way it's now. And I think the reason I'm thinking about so many examples we've seen even in recent times, and the most recent was the Louis Vuitton Jamaica jumper, which had the wrong colours under. You've had H&M, Gucci, Pepsi, all over the years, all these different agencies that are putting content out there to a culture that doesn't make any sense, doesn't represent them, doesn't serve them. The advert's actually offensive a lot of the times, yet they don't seem to want to change the people behind the scenes, the people who are making the decisions. They just keep on getting it wrong. And part of me thinks that is because there is no accountability, there's no real fallout. People still keep on buying their goods, therefore they can keep on doing what they want to do. Or is there something else that can be done to actually hold these kind of organizations to account going forward?
Yeah, so, you have to kind of like put it into different kind of like categories of offense, let's say. Because, some of the things that you mentioned are, you look at them and go, people need to lose their job off the back of that. I mean, they're kind of like, they're so serious. They're almost deliberate, and you're a bit like, hang on a minute, that can't work. But I think that, the problem that I will attack most is the culture and the process more than the individuals themselves, because the challenge I have about a lot of places where those mistakes are made there are too many people involved in it for those kind of mistakes to be made. You have a brand side, the brand owner, who ultimately starts off and kicks things off and briefs the agency. And that goes to, as I said before, usually goes to an account director, who then goes to a strategy person, then goes to, the creatives, and then it kind of goes back again. There's quite a lot of people along the process, along the way, to kind of like go, hang on a minute, this is a bit wrong. But the problem is that some of those finer elements of kind of like, execution. Okay, is this person going to be black or white or whatever, or those aren't scripted a lot of the time. That isn't kind of like in the strategy. You might have an audience identified and be like, okay, we're speaking to these people and whatever else. But let's face it, in terms of, unless it is a completely an ethnically targeted product, the chances are it's going to be kind of like, we're going for all different ethnicities. So that kind of gives a license to the person that's actually putting that final casting thing together as to, okay, is it going to be, black or white in this instance and all the rest of it. And, there are elements where mistakes get made and they put someone in, and, but the problem is that the process is wrong when even the most junior person in the room hasn't got the opportunity to flag something and go, hang on a minute, this is wrong. And at this point, the problem is that sometimes when these mistakes have been made, you've had someone probably ethnic on the team, but they haven't had that kind of permission and psychological safety to stand up and say something against it, or to go, hang on a minute, we haven't built into our process an element of testing and validating whether this is fair and this is fine. Because the other thing I have as a slight kind of issue is there's the tokenism element of some companies that recruit someone that's diverse and expect them to be the guardian of all diverse voices in the world. And as you and me know, in terms of different cultures, different countries, different, we'll have all sorts of different generations will have different opinions and different things. So, you've got to realize that it's actually a sensitive and a slightly complicated thing, that you need to invest some time and, have the right kind of relationships with the right people to get the right insight back. But just don't do it lightly. Don't do it lightly. Don't rush it. Assume you're not the expert. Assume you don't just know. And then you'll get it right. Assume you're kind of like likely to offend if you don't check it, do your appropriate kind of validation of things. And I think the thing is, there's a mixture of kind of arrogance and, there's a lot of kind of like, to be a kind of creative, it's a difficult job in terms of, there's ups and downs of, you're basically always judged by your last idea. And, there are heroes, when they win awards, and then suddenly it's like, they're reduced to nothing when they in those kind of dark and dull patches as such. And the issue with that is that it's a bit of a confidence game as well. They need confidence, they need to feel good and all the rest of it. But that confidence can transfer into arrogance and can transfer into making decisions as this kind of lone artist, lone genius kind of complex, which is where mistakes can be made and offense can be caused. The biggest surprise to me is not that the mistakes have been made, but there isn't a rapid acceleration of getting the right kind of stops and checks in place, and also changing the team, making sure that you have people at all the right levels, from all the right kind of backgrounds and places, to make sure that your culture is just centered in the right place. You're naturally thinking about everyone, because that's, that you look around your office and you when you're daydreaming in your office and thinking about this idea and imagining things, when you look around your office floor, you've got society in front of you. You've got your customers around, the people you're trying to target around, rather than working and thinking within your own bubble. The sad reality of the industry, the advertising industry, is that when you break down and look at that 4.7% of ethnic minorities and black people in senior positions, if you take out the people that went to public school, then you're down to basically zero. So actually, even though it's diverse, it's still from a bubble. And actually, these people, if you ask them about their stories, they got in through some kind of element of privilege, opening the door, because they had the right things in their CVs, the right story in that sense, then they kind of got through, which is a shame, because as you know, if someone's lived a very kind of different life in a very different environment, they're not speaking for everyone. They're not the same as the the kids that have been, growing up in Hackney, for example. So I think that the process, the admission of like understanding that, you don't know the audiences and as well as you could do. I mean, the slight kind of like challenge in what I'm saying is the job and a role of a strategic person is to understand an audience and to empathize with that audience and to try and unpick the insights in that audience, to know why they're doing something and to what kind of makes them tick. It is incredibly hard to know people that well, but it is quite easy to know people quite on a shallow level, on a general level. So almost like it's quite easy to predict what a crowd might do. So let's pick, for example, the American elections and the Capitol, protest and the invasion. It was quite easy probably to predict that, okay, if they're going to march, they're going to probably, something bad's going to happen, and it's going to turn pretty nasty, and then, and it's going to escalate and people will die, and all sorts of negative things will happen in that sense. In terms of on a very kind of like individual basis, it can be incredibly complex because, when you sit down with people on an individual level, you realize the nuances. You realize that, the background, okay, actually they see it like this, they see it like that. People are a lot more kind of complex on that kind of sophisticated level. And it's one of the fascinating things that Malcolm Gladwell talks about in his book Talking to Strangers as well, about how we often kind of like default to giving people the kind of the benefit of the doubt and believing they're talking and saying the truth, and actually no, hang on a minute, when we dig into it, it's a little bit more complex than that, and people are harder to read and understand than you might think. And I think that's the truth, and I think that's why we have to respect the fact that we don't know individuals and cultures on the levels that we need to know them to be confident in sending out our advertising communications as we script them, for example.
Yeah, that is so true. I think even for someone on the outside looking in, that's everything you talked about around having that psychological safety to speak up, around the bubble that has been created, because I know in the creative industry especially is one that's around like free internship referral schemes, and it kind of keeps that whole circle kind of going because it's the same networks tapping into the same networks and the same universities or friendship groups. Nothing's really ever going to change. Like you said, when you look outside your window, everyone you see, it just represents who you are. There is no change. There's no thought that goes into your head, which is why it's so important that you need that diversity in your organization, but not only just have it there, but actually have the inclusion bit where they can actually speak up and have their voices heard and be like, nope, that's not right. No, we can't send that out. And have that stopgap that be like, this is not the one. We need to do something different.
And sorry, one of the things I was going to say was about this kind of like realizing the potential of, let's say the case for diversity. So the first thing that I think is slightly disappointing is, I've sat in those rooms with, CEOs that couldn't really see the benefit of hiring someone from a different kind of background, let's say, with a lower kind of like educational kind of status in terms of qualification than someone that's recently graduated from Oxford and Cambridge, for example. They genuinely couldn't understand the difference because, let's put it this way, on paper, you're going for the most qualified person, in terms of the highest, most intelligent person as such on paper. So that's what you're going for. And to some degree, if that is your kind of like parameter of success, then kind of like great. I mean, I would challenge that kind of approach to say you need to change your kind of like your scorecard as to what success looks like, because actually, that person is the person that's going to make a mistake when they're judging the creative work as to whether it's relevant to everyone or not. And that person won't have that kind of point of view. But actually, whenever I've been in that kind of situation, I've realized that I'm in the room with people that don't understand creativity and don't understand actually how to do it. The truth of the matter is that most people that run advertising agencies are good people that are, safe pair of hands, solid account people, really good with clients. They came up through that route, but they were never allowed to have ideas. The chief creative officer always stays as the chief creative officer most of the time, unless they go and set up their own agency. Majority of the time they are, running the department, and they are treated like the gods in the company, but ultimately the CEO or the person in charge has come up through that kind of account management line. And in the creative agency world, in lots of them, the way they operate is that actually that person's not allowed to come up with ideas. How dare they? That's not their job. So they're almost not looking for that person to be creative. They're looking for them to be compliant and to be, a safe pair of hands. And the worst word that I will choose to use is agreeable. The reason why I say that word is because I remember talking to someone who said that, what really stood out to them when they were applying for a job of a company I won't mention was the fact that this word jumped out of them that really stood out, which was agreeable. This person looking for someone that was agreeable. And it just stuck in their heads as being, that is such an odd word to use. You're going for a high profile job, you're asked to make decisions and really kind of lead teams and all the rest of it. And it's like, hang on a minute, be agreeable. It's like, well, sometimes I won't, I might not be, because, sometimes tough decisions may have to be made and whatever.
That's the whole point.
That's the whole point, exactly, yeah. But actually, what a lot of the people are trying to, do by design is create an environment that people feel, they feel comfortable in and protected in a sense, and they don't feel uneasy with that kind of like potential disruption and conflict. But creativity is comfortable conflict in that sense. It is clashing of ideas and thoughts and all the rest of it, but ultimately leading to a better place. Doing it with that kind of like that kind of good kind of like goal and spirit and high the right kind of values in mind. I think it's really interesting in terms of when we what was it about this time last year, coming up to this time last year when the pandemic hit and The Last Dance was on. So the Michael Jordan documentary, which a lot of people had strong views on in terms of it was a great documentary, but a lot of people I found it quite interesting how. And I used to be a massive Michael Jordan fan. I used to play a lot of basketball, quite a high level as well. And I had friends who went to America and played there and things like that. So I watched it with, a lot of detailed interest. And a lot of people were like, but he wasn't a nice guy though, was he? He wouldn't have been nice to play with and all that kind of stuff. And I was just like, I found it really interesting, that conversation, because I was like, well, that's what winning is like. That is what winning at that level.
It gets ugly sometimes.
Yeah, it's ugly sometimes. I mean, I was kind of like, he didn't come across to me as being, oh my God, this, some of the things he did was just like completely terrible. I was just like, he was just hard of people. He was like, this is your job. That's one of the quotes he said to me. It's the guy, this is your job. And it is. This is your job. You're playing. You're here to win. And it's going to be hard. It's going to be, there will be some times when you can be light and relaxed and all the rest of it. And there's times when you just got to learn the drills and do the thing. And that's, if you're there to win and you're setting you've got an opportunity to be the best, then why not go for it if that's your profession in that sense. If you're happy with average, then there are plenty of places to go and be average. And I think that's one of the key things about companies. And let's say diversity as well. Like my view on diversity and about advising companies has changed largely. And it's gone from having this kind of position of, everyone's kind of like trying and let's help them be better and, and kind of like, help them, tell them what to do in a sense and hold their hand a little bit, to go, no, sorry, everyone knows what to do. Everyone's clever enough to work this out. If there was a brief on the table in an advertising agency about how do you increase diversity in this advertising, it would be solved within half a day. It'd be done. If you know what I mean, it'd be done. Success, results will be coming in tomorrow. And no one treats it like that. No one treats it like a brief. No one kind of wants that kind of rapid kind of change. So I give people, I don't treat people like fools, and I say if it matters enough to people, then they will do it. And what I want to do is celebrate the companies that are doing it and demonstrate how more successful they're being. And part of that is this kind of circle of accountability. So the bit that falls down in the advertising world is clients and brands have to feel the same way. And clients and brands who are the budget holders have to start demanding more from their agencies in that perspective. And they have to start demanding more from themselves. Because the elephant in the room here is the lack of diversity in marketing departments. There is a tragic lack of diversity in marketing departments. It isn't even accounted at the moment. There's not a central census at the moment. There is one to be launched soon, but there isn't. So if you ask, ISBA, what is the demographic kind of makeup and the ethnicity of, marketing teams, they don't know, which, says it all really, because a lot of people probably don't want to know how bad it actually is. But there's a lack of, BAME and black CMOs, you can count them on your hand. So the thing about that is that, it's this circle of accountability that clients have got to start holding agencies to account. And then the better agencies will start to win because of it. Will start to win, they'll start to get the work, they'll start to demonstrate the difference. They won't make those mistakes. They won't make those mistakes of getting those ads out there that offend, that suddenly reduce, the stock price goes down because it's caused massive offense. And the other kind of part of the circle of accountability is consumers are getting smarter now. The great thing about the Black Lives Matter movement and tragic events of last summer was as soon as brands jumped on the bandwagon and started posting the black squares and started going, showing some kind of element of solidarity, people were quick to go, hang on a minute, look at your board. hang on a minute, look at this, look at your team. How can you say that if you're not doing it? That was the best thing about it, that, doing it all at the same time. So that suddenly people were being assessed about what they were doing and the inner workings of their companies, because the two things have to live together. How you are inside is how you should be outside as well, and how you are outside should be what you're like inside. And I think that's the best thing about it, this kind of circle of accountability. Now consumers are in the act of holding companies to account into the way they communicate about these issues. And so therefore, advertising becomes less of a in a more general sense, I believe that advertising is less of it's a risky kind of like costly thing that might gain us a lot. To actually, it's this is like a legal kind of issue where if you get it wrong, you're losing money. You're losing money a lot because people are walking away and rejecting you, actively rejecting you. Typically advertising is seen as, we just won't gain a lot, if no one responds to this advertising campaign. And then we'll just plod along and we'll lose a bit of money in the production of it. No, actually, people will actively walk away from you as a brand. Everyone has choice right now. Choice is limitless. This whole paradox of choice, there's limitless choice. Digital transformation, particularly in the last year, as every high street brand and all the rest of it has gone, I need to start trading online now, has made it so much more easier. Everything can be delivered tomorrow. So, now people have got that kind of infinite choice. They don't have to stick around. They don't have to be loyal to you. And if they see a campaign in social that is campaigning against a certain brand, then that's it. With a couple of clicks of their button, that's it. You're out of their shopping basket and someone else is in. And so it all becomes very real for brands.
That's like a mic drop moment. Because it's the reality. That's you effectively hitting them where it hurts, where you're making them take account for the fact that because consumers are a lot wiser than they used to be, and therefore they're going to make decisions and vote with their pockets and their money. Brands who pay for a lot of these agencies now need to understand the reputational risk that comes with working with people who aren't necessarily taking this seriously as well, because it goes all the way up and down that whole supply chain. And once you starting to do that, that's how you start to get changes. And other organizations and other industries are starting to link their supply chain to their whole performance rather than just looking at it in isolation. So when agencies start to do that and organizations who are paying for the digital start to do that, then it makes such a massive difference throughout the whole supply chain completely. One thing I want to ask you about was, obviously, you created the Barbershop a number of years ago. I'm curious, why did you decide the Barbershop?
Yeah, so there's a number of different reasons why I chose the name The Barbershop. So I'll start it off in terms of the chronological order, the way in which I've been talking about those reasons. So the first thing is when you decide to name anything, and it started off by thinking, okay, planning to do this as a venture, leaving the comfort of, kind of big agency, kind of network world. It's quite a big plan, but you start to notice, naming becomes important. It's like, what am I going to call it? And you notice everything. You notice words everywhere. Everything that's, in life, you just go, would that be a good name? And so I was walking around, as we used to do, walking around high streets and things in the good old days.
Back in the day.
Back in a day, in my day, when I used to walk around the high street. So you noticed I noticed a lot of barbershops, all sorts of different kind of shapes and sizes, and they're all beautiful, and lots of things. I was like, this is like the new thing, isn't it? They're suddenly like, and I'm a man of little hair, so I have little reason to hang out in a barbershop these days. It's been a while actually. And so I'd never have a reason to go inside them, but I'd always observe from the outside and go, that looks like a nice place to, spend some time and get your hair cut. And so that was one of the reasons. And then someone came and presented to me. Their business was digital screens in chicken shops. And they use the analogy of how chicken shops in London were a bit like barbershops in terms of these kind of like community kind of spots where people would go and congregate and stuff and hang out and, like a kind of like a cultural kind of spot. And I like that idea, that kind of analogy, because when they start to talk about barbershops, it's like, gathering and people just like congregating, talking, discussing, debating, having disagreements, but, still always kind of like, getting on and stuff. I thought that was great. Reminded me of the days when I did go to the barbershop. And then I also like the idea of the fact that every barber had this relationship with their client where, the client will only ever come back if they like the work they did. So they had this kind of, brilliant kind of trusting kind of relationship, which was very kind of like personal. And they would use the kind of the same tools as everyone else, but have, incredibly different kind of creative creations with those tools. So, the skill was in the person using the tools rather than just the tools themselves, which I thought was quite a nice analogy for the work that we do. The other kind of part of it was, this kind of like, I mentioned the kind of the congregating, the conversations, which I like a lot in terms of those kind of like challenging talk. And then the other couple of things that I say is that the first ever business I ever started was a barbershop. Back in the day, in Southend-on-Sea, I used to, it started off, I cut my brother's hair, he'll cut my hair, and then we'll cut some friends' hair. And then my brother produced some cards. And he was like, yeah, I'm going to start, getting more customers. And he produced these cards called, he called his business Rough Cuts. So I was like, all right.
I like that.
So I produced my cards, called them Slim Trims. So it's Rough Cuts versus Slim Trims. And there we were giving out our flyers to people we didn't know. Little cards, little printed out cards. And then so that became a bit of an income stream, cutting hair in my mum's, our house for friends and strangers. So I was a bit like, okay, well, if it all fails, at least I can use the URL for something else and go back to being a barber. But the other kind of like slightly more, the other funny reason is that my middle name is Desmond. So that joke only makes people over the age of 40 laugh.
I'm not 40, I know it. Like, that's a classic. Oh, wow. Slim cuts. Yeah. Wow. That's interesting.
While we're on the subject of kind of naming, a bit of kind of like a branding and kind of naming advice that I once got from someone who spent a lot of time, branding and naming, and said to me, what the best name, is for a brand? He said, the name that the client wants. He said that, he spent years and years and years, going through these names and going through the meaning of this name, and all the rest of it, And at the end of the day, it all comes down to, what the client's comfortable with and what they're going to kind of back and support, because naming is so subjective. It's kind of like, it could be anything, and it's about the meaning that you give that name in terms of what you do and how you do it and all the rest of it. Every name can be ripped apart and can be looked at and gone, oh no, it's not great because of this. Apple as a name, let's say, it's just an apple, and you could go through all the different fruit in the world and call another company that fruit. Why apple rather than anything else? It's like, there's no kind of like, oh yeah, because apple means this and that and all the rest of it. No, it's just a nice word that has been given meaning. And now you can't say the word apple without thinking creativity, you get inspired by it. But that's because of everything they are as a company rather than the name itself. Remember Orange? That was a great name, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Mobile phones. Orange. Wasn't that great until the company, whichever company came along and said, no, we don't like that name anymore. We're going to call it something else. So I think my point about that is to never spend too much time worrying and obsessing about your name. Seek opinion, but once you get something you like, inject it with purpose and meaning.
And just run with it. That is very, very good advice, actually. Because I
think
that's one thing.
On the URLs, on the searching in the Google searches as well.
No, I think for that's, I know that's something that a lot of people spend a lot of time fixated on. Is like, does it need to sound Latin? Does it, all that kind of stuff? And it's just like you said. Sometimes it's just like, okay, that's the name. You run with it, and you give it that meaning behind it through the work that you're doing and through the case studies that you're building up. And then soon enough, you become synonymous with that, and then it just becomes a name. And people's like, yeah, it made sense, perfect sense. Of course it did. So I wanted to ask you. Obviously, you do a lot of work with a lot of big brands, big companies, and you've had a lot of experience the last 20 plus years. But then you also coach under sevens football. How do you find, which one do you find harder, coaching under sevens football or dealing with the big brands that you work with?
There are a lot of commonalities between the two. There's a surprising amount you can learn about human behavior when you coach an under sevens football team. You know what? I love the coaching, and some people find it really kind of difficult and frustrating, but I find it quite fascinating because what I do in terms of advertising, ultimately at the heart of what I do is strategic work, which is about understanding people, audiences, and how to communicate. So it's a bit like an experiment when you're dealing with kids, because, you know, you get them at all different kinds of moods and, you know, whatever, abilities, interest levels, you know, you're dealing with it all. And it's a constant kind of challenge of how do you keep them interested, but also how do you get them to, you know, remember something and do something as planned. And it's just a small little experiment for you, you know, to try out different things and see how they work. And the great thing about sport is the instant results element of it, you know, which is not, you don't get from business all the time. You know, sport is kind of like you can try something and get the result and then, okay, you know, go again in a sense. And as much as we try and make kind of business like that, that is often the problem with business in terms of when we try and get too many insights and learnings on too short a period of time, particularly when it comes to advertising, because, you know, too often we're looking at metrics and, you know, short-term kind of things and responses, when actually so much of advertising has a lasting and long effect, you know, that kind of brand shifting effect, which is really a significant part of it. You can probably hear my kid knocking on the door. Okay, I'm back.
Cool. Everything all right?
Yeah, absolutely. They've got the toy snake that they wanted.
As in chocolate or sweet or actual?
No, fluffy, cuddly.
Okay. Cool.
Don't ask me why they wanted that as a present.
Kids, they want what they want.
If they can't go to the Amazon, then, you know, we can recreate
Bring
it
it
home.
In fact, when you think about your kids growing up, and you think about their future, do you ever think they should go down a particular route, or are you more interested in developing them to have a level of like self-awareness and allow them to explore what they want to do?
Yeah, you know, I haven't thought about it enough in a sense of, you know, would I like them to do this or do that, and that's almost deliberate. So I kind of like, you know, I think the answer to it is kind of like no. You know, I mean, I fully suspect that I will get to a point in time when they start to talk a little bit more about careers, where I'll have a lot to say about careers. And have a lot of opinions. And I guess in terms of, you know, from my point of view, it's more about them doing something that matches their personalities and their kind of expectations of that thing are accurate, you know, which I think is really difficult because, you know, one of the problems that I have with kind of like this whole subject of, you know, moving from education to careers, let's say, is that I think that, you know, even in my own career, and I'm surrounded by a lot of people who kind of gone through this, you know, we spend a lot of time just working it out ourselves, you know, and you know, in a job and working out, hang on, okay, I could do this role, I could do this slightly different role, and, you know, that would change things a little bit. And people are always asking these questions, you know, even with 15 years experience in the industry or whatever, they're still asking these questions about, oh, what would it be like if I take this slightly different role in this company? And yes, your job could be completely different. It could be completely different. Your life could be completely different. You know, and I'm mentoring people all the time who are, you know, they have those kind of like challenges and those complexities. And what's the right answer? Well, it depends what your personality is like and what you're comfortable with. It depends what you enjoy. It depends whether you like, you want to do some kind of an international client role. Would you like clients calling you up at 6 o'clock in the morning and putting in that call at, you know, at 10 p.m. because, you know, you're working with Asia? You know, is that okay for you or not? You know, so it's so kind of personal as to, you know, kind of like satisfaction. And, you know, it's really that, you know, we need to maximize the amount of information we've got about things before we go into it. That's the best we can be. So, you know, I think that, you know, right now, I'm fascinated by seeing how their personalities develop and how their interest develops. And you know, bringing it back to that kind of sport analogy, I think it's quite interesting because, you know, I think you can learn quite a lot from kind of like sport, as you can by kind of any other kind of, you know, passion subject, let's say, for someone. But what I would take from sport is when people look at something like, for example, their kids and playing sport, people often have these ambitions. Oh yeah, I'd love them to be a professional footballer or something like that, whatever else. And I'm like, they're saying that with very little information and understanding about what it takes, because, you know, what it takes, not in terms of the sacrifice and commitment, but the chances of not making it, and actually the consequences of not making it, and the unhappiness and sadness that comes with that, which can be awful. But also the sacrifices made in terms of not doing everything else to do that one single thing. So, for example, if you're on that kind of like, if you are got an incredible talent and you're spotted and you're on that path, and suddenly you're playing for England when you're under 12 or whatever it is, then there goes the ski holiday, for example, because if you break your leg or you get injured and then suddenly you can't play in that tournament, then that's not good for your potential career. So you cut all these things out. And then what happens after is when you get to 17, 18, you've missed out on these things, and you probably miss out on that, that career in football. Do you start to binge on those things, or do you try and catch up in some kind of bad way of, when everyone else is past that element, you're not doing it at the right time. So I think it's very kind of wrong, actually, to have too much control and, over someone else's life in that sense. You can try and give them as much knowledge and, information as you can about these things, so they can make, good judgments themselves. And I think you can also try and set them up with the right level, and that is a really important thing, the right level of security to give them the confidence to be able to potentially fail and experiment and trial things, but also it needs to be matched with the drive to get things right and to stick with things and to commit to things, because there's so many things that you do that are not good when you get started. They're not great. One of the best bits of advice that I give to people in our industry that I got was, media's a bit shit until about 3 years into it. And I was like, hang on a minute, I'm having a great time. I'm going to parties with, the cheeky girls and girls allowed. And it was like, no. yeah, but you're not getting paid anything for it, and that was the reality is that actually the job itself was pretty kind of like, dull, and, you're doing a lot of, other people's work kind of thing. And it wasn't that exciting. It wasn't that creative. And that's what you wanted to be doing. When you thought about the job itself, you wanted to be given more responsibility and doing more creative things. And you don't get that at the start. You've got to stick it through. You've got to prove that you can, cross the T's and dot the I's and stuff, and do all that kind of detail stuff. And you've got that incredible attention to detail. You're consistent, you're reliable, you've done it time and time again to the point of boredom. And then it starts to get good because that stuff gets easy, or someone else can help you do that stuff. And then you start to do the more interesting things. So there's an importance about sticking things out before they come good, before you enjoy them. And I think that every child has got to kind of like, go through that experience. Otherwise, you'll constantly be bouncing around from thing to thing, never really having the good bit about that thing. Only ever, doing it for a short period of time and never going through the painful part to find the enjoyable bit.
Yeah. And I think your evidence to that, actually looking at your story that you broke down at the start of this as well, of actually sticking with something and going through the good and the bad and riding it out, and see the amazing career that you had. I think, in fact, one thing I wanted to say earlier on was, it's very interesting that a number of the brands that rejected you at that start point, you worked with them. It's kind of gone like 360, and you've actually ended up working with them in the end in a completely different capacity, but running things for them. So it's amazing how things.
Well, there's some that have employed me, and I've rejected their offers.
I think before we as we wrap up, there's just two questions I have. One would be, how do you define leadership, just based on everything that you do, everything that you've seen over the last 20 plus years? What is the key driver to being a good leader?
What I would say is drawn upon my experience of the people that have inspired me as leaders more than anything else, I think. And I think that, probably the key kind of like defining thing about leadership is being a person that people want to follow, that people will go the extra mile for, that people believe in and feel infused and inspired by, that people want to be in a room with. I think that is kind of really key, because there are the technical elements of that. Let's say, for example, having a vision and, having being kind of organized and, being able to say the right things in the right moments. But actually, I think that it's a more important thing about the values of that person and believing in the values of that person. For me, particularly when I've got close to leaders in terms of I was, directly reporting into the leaders, it was the knowledge that when you're out the room, they were championing you. They were also making decisions that you would be proud of, in a sense, in terms of the ethical things, the right things, They were pursuing things for the right reasons, turning down the things that, that were tempting, but you should not be doing because they were, not what the company and the brand and the proposition was about. For me, purpose and why we do things is really important, because I think that it's really easy to get to the position in work where you've covered your fundamental needs. Your business is it's ticking along, it's fine. You're servicing kind of clients and you're generating kind of income, and it's like, well, what next? What kind of company do you want to become after that? Is it just about being the most profitable thing in the world, or is it about being the most purposeful thing and changing the world? And I think you've got those choices, and and a good leader kind of like stands for something and pursues that. On a kind of like a grand scale, and it can be looked at from a few different lenses, but you have to talk about Jeff Bezos, for example, and he's been recently in the press for changing his role now at Amazon. But the thing about Jeff Bezos that I think made him unique, which I think you have to respect, is that kind of relentless pursuit of satisfying the customer and putting the customer first. Those shareholder letters that he wrote every year when they weren't making money, saying why they had improved this and what they were doing for the customer and how it's going to pay off. That is incredible leadership, because that is going against, the people that are paying you and the people that are, backing you and what they are all saying, because you have a clear kind of vision and purpose. And ultimately the consumer truth element in that meant that he would have had people following him on that mission because they would have believed in that mission. They would have believed in that truth. And I think that is really, really important in terms of leadership, because people are different. People have different interests in life. For me, it's about that kind of like clarity and alignment in terms of, the reasons why you're here in the earth. Because I could be working for you as a leader. I could be working for someone. There are, a million different leaders that I could be spending my time with. And actually, when we look at ourselves in terms of as individuals, we're only going to look back at life and say time was our most precious commodity. And I wish that I spent more or less time doing this or that thing. And, our careers race away. And when we look back at them, we look back at, okay, well, who did I learn off and who did I like, who did I enjoy being around, and how was that time? And you want to make that time as productive as possible by being around inspiring people that were, they're accelerating you. They will open doors, a leader will open doors for you. They'll give you access to things. But that is only if they aligned with your values and your, both your values are aligned. So for me, I think that's what it is. It's about being transparent, having that kind of integrity, but ultimately being someone that people want to follow.
Nice, love that. And the last one would be, what do you want your legacy to be?
So I don't really care too much about legacy. I think that there's a lot of problem with legacy. I think there's a lot of problem with people's pursuit of legacy. I mean, I think Walt Disney's still frozen somewhere, isn't he? He wants to be defrosted at some point so he can get their personal kind of like congratulations and accolades for everything that's happened with Marvel or whatever. I don't know. It's just ridiculous, isn't it? The world moves on. People, the beauty of the world is that new life takes over and comes with new, fresh ideas and wisdom and thoughts and brings something new and unimaginable. It's beautiful that things get lost, that things aren't said, that people imagine, what would he have thought about this, or what would he have done about that? I didn't call the barber shop the Dino Myers-Lamptey shop. I think that it's a thing that, one day other people can run and own. People with the same values can run and own. I think that if I really was going to kind of like, write the Wikipedia page, let's say, then I think it would have to be something about democratizing the belief in your ability to be creative and innovative in yourself, and reframe the understanding of how great ideas are made and where they come from. Something along those lines. I mean, let me give you a little bit more context to that in a sense. I believe that kind of like there are so many problems in the world that, ideas and collaboration and kind of like a willingness to solve that problem can solve. That has been demonstrated by the what we've had to do in the vaccinations for COVID. The world pulling together to solve something. An incredible amount can be solved in that sense. But often there is a misalignment behind, the ideas, the doers, and the willingness to make certain things happen. So I believe that actually it is kind of like ideas and attitude that kind of like, are the solutions to most things. So if everyone has a little bit of kind of optimism and hope in that area, and a belief and faith in that area, then I think it can solve so many more things.
Yeah.
Sorry, my kids are noisy again.
Nah, it's fine. Nah, and to be honest, when you're talking about legacy and everything you just described around legacy and collaboration, it's stuff that you're already actually doing anyway. When I look at the work you're doing with like Brixton Finishing School and all the other different businesses that you're involved with, which is around changing the conversation, getting organizations within the creative industry to actually take action, as well as still finding time to run your own business and to change things. It's absolutely amazing, absolutely inspiring. And I definitely just want to say thank you for everything that you're doing. I know a lot of creative people that I know who are coming into the industry who are young look up to you, or look up to what you've done, and look up to you as that trailblazer. So just keep on doing what you're doing, because it's definitely making an impact, especially when you keep on talking about ethnicity pay gap and things like that, and kind of drumming that message in and in over and over and over again and letting it out, which is really, really good.
We're not going to stop there. So thank you very much. I mean, there's a lot to do basically, and if you have the privilege and the opportunity to have got through in some way and to have got a platform, then I think it's your responsibility to use it for the benefit of all.
You're definitely doing that. Thank you for your time today. I've absolutely loved this conversation. I've learned a lot, to be honest, as well as the way things kind of work internally. But I really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you.